given that despite his age. So I've always had the personal impression, and I'm curious what you guys think of this, really, I am, that Bannon isn't a leader. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Tell me how stupid I am. I believe it, Reaper. I'm still working on my resume. I need more under my belt. So we go and talk to a few of these people. We get a little bits of character bits from them. Locke actually lies to Tara, unwilling to actually divulge the truth of what bugs him so much, and why he fights and all that fun stuff. Sabin says, and I like Sabin's thing because he basically says, "I have no idea what to tell you. I don't know any of this stuff. This is all beyond me. All I can tell you is that I trust my brother and I love my brother, and he's awesome." Which is another of, like, we're already up to like 3 points emphasizing just how close the Figaro brother is. I could see that, Bernessa. And of course Edgar, the leader, says the obvious, but the way he says it is fantastic. If we push you too hard to join us, we are no different from the Empire, so we want you to make up your own mind. Was there a torrent? Up here? Hey, Felix. You're talking about over here, aren't you? Yeah, there's this little thing over here. I don't even remember what this is. I never get it. It's a white key. That's why I don't ever get that. I like that idea, Rowan. A lot, actually. In fact, that would actually fit in with my fan fiction rather nicely. You know, Bannon's this guy who ends up taking over, and that's the point at which he starts to realize that he actually cares about the cause, rather than just being a merchant who's trying to make a buck. Anyways, I will make the fan fiction work, I swear. Now, fun fact, for those of you not aware, you can get the Genji Glove and the meeting. We're going to do that right now. We want the Genji Glove because the Gauntlet is a worthless piece of crap relic, which is only useful for like 3 specific strategies, and all of them are crap. The Genji Glove, on the other hand, is the best thing ever. So we say no once, get the Genji Glove, then we can go say yes, and then we actually get the meeting. We're going to do one other thing. I'm doing this because I bet none of you have ever seen this. I'm serious. You ready for this, guys? This is so stupid. I didn't find out about this until like 10 years after this game came out. Someone dropped a scrap of paper. Let's just leave it here. There we go. I agree, Scorpion. Either that or we're supposed to come up with our own. Bannon is very much a non-character when you think about it. Oh, I meant to say yes. It's such a habit to say no. Hang on, let's say yes. There we go. But yeah, pay attention over the next few scenes. Bannon doesn't make a single decision. Alright. Who did this? Who left this piece of paper here? Alright, hands up. How many of you knew that little tidbit was there if you see the piece of trash and leave it there? Obviously I knew it was there because I was showing it off, but I mean, really? There are so many tiny little things in this game. And then Tara giggles while he throws it away. Right. Well, we all know the Empire's using Magitech. How did he create it? Blah, 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 blah. What, Taran? It's another cutscene. So I'm just going to summarize a little bit of what's happening up here. Bannon is aware of the War of the Magi. You know, again, there's that scholar thing coming up again. And Bannon is the one who connects Magitech and Espers to the War of the Magi. But again, the only reason this came up to being is Bannon basically was like, I need you guys to look into this, blah, blah, blah. Edgar and Locke both have spent their time trying to figure out what the heck's going on with this situation. Edgar is the one who makes the decision, we need Magitech to fight Magitech. Edgar makes that choice. Bannon then agrees. That's true, Baronessa. I was actually going to talk about that soon. Very unlikely, Torin. If they are, they would just be aware of her as another Magitech Knight. Although, admittedly, there are not many of those. In fact, I think there's only 2. Now, you remember, in FF9, Samurai, I want you to think about this, because this amuses me. Remember in FF9, there was the Burmesian gentleman who had basically come from the Burmesian front lines all the way to Lindblum, gotten his way up there to an audience with the king, and then died there. On the one hand, that is awfully convenient, but if you remember during the lore run, we actually talked it out, and we kind of figured out how that could have happened, and how it was actually kind of likely that it would have happened, based on the circumstances. I mentioned that because that's the exact same thing here. This guy came from South Figaro, which is way over there, across an entire mountain. Now here's the interesting thing. I think, personally, I love the idea. Maybe I'm just a sadist who likes World War I a little bit too much. But I like the idea that this soldier was stabbed or struck or otherwise, you know, basically grievously wounded. And he might have survived that wound, but what he did was he then turned and ran across Mount Colts, fighting or fleeing his way from all the monsters and all the remnants of Vargas's, you know, attempted coup and all that fun stuff that was going on there, all the way making it to here, at which point he is ragged, haggard, beaten, bleeding out, and barely makes it here to die. And he does die here in order to give this news to us about the fact that the Empire has taken South Figaro and will be coming this way. Yeah, exactly, Samurai. Yeah, you see the parallels there between the two. That wouldn't surprise me, Formosan, honestly. As an aside, one of the things I always found interesting is it is Bannon who automatically assumes the Empire knows they're here. And yet, there's never anything else, ever, about the Empire coming to the Returner hideout. If we come back here, the Returners are just fine, at least up until a certain point in the game, in which case they move. The Empire soldiers who we can talk to in an Imperial outfit in South Figaro don't even mention the Returner hideout. I'm not saying that Bannon's making a bad call here. Actually, quite the contrary. Bannon is making the correct tactical job here. He is saying the Empire has taken one of our nearest ports of call, South Figaro, it's right over there. We need to get the hell out of Dodge. He's right to make that call. I just mention it because he automatically assumes the Empire knows they're there, which in my opinion speaks again to that inexperience and that lack of leadership quality that Bannon has. That's the only reason I bring that up. I'm sorry, this is kind of turning into a lore run in addition to a review. It's such a habit to lore run games, you know what I mean? No, you probably don't actually know what I mean. Cute moment for Edgar to get all flustered. And again, Edgar is the one who makes a choice. Hey, Equalitas, hope you're liking Metal Gear Solid 5. You are not my only viewer playing it right now. No surprise there. But again, Bannon is the one, if you missed it, I'm sorry, I skipped through the dialogue, but Bannon says, what do we do? He actually flat out says, what do we do next? Edgar's the one saying, we're going to go do this. And then Bannon says, yes, we'll do this. Once again, Edgar takes command just like that. Now, in that case, I'm willing to grant it might not necessarily be that Edgar's the real person in charge of the Returners, so much that he's just so much more of a natural leader that even Bannon naturally gravitates to his leadership. You know what I mean by that, right? That's true in real life, that's true in fiction. A natural leader, someone who naturally has that charisma, even other leaders will probably automatically follow that person's orders and advice and whatnot, at least as long as they're relatively in the same chain of command, without really even thinking about it. That's the Revan effect, for lack of a better term. Hey, Preacher. Yes, Edgar is the wound in Magic. Which is funny because, and I hate to keep comparing this to KOTOR, but tell me Kefka doesn't strike you as a literal wound in Magic. Are you dumping money on it, Aquilitas? To speed up the mother base, I mean. Alright, switching to this format. Yeah, there you go, Rowan. I like that. I like it. He's even a nihilist. Okay. God, Bannon is level 6. I hate you, Bannon. You are such a worthless sack of crap. Actually, I really should save before I do this. Well, we'll see this. Screw it. By the way, I know you guys were talking about Bannon-Gorf being in Smash Bros. Earlier. His special would be if he would be complete crab. However, if he got knocked out for any reason, everyone in the entire match would lose. He wouldn't win. They'd just all lose. I'd have to give Revengeance another playthrough, Titans, a proper playthrough rather than just playing it at a friend's thing, because I don't actually own Revengeance, in order to actually be able to do that. Keep Bannon. My opinion on FF15 is that I will play it and then determine from that. Also, damn it, Ithor! Tell me you're bombarding that planet. Into the ground. It's so weird not speedrunning this. By the way, my favorite boss fight in Revengeance is Armstrong. But then again, my favorite everything in Revengeance is Armstrong. Favorite character, favorite scenes, favorite boss fight. Beautiful, very. I'm trying to think of how to explain what's going on here. Because, see, one of the things they did, twice? 3 times. 3 times in this game. They have a roller coaster level. Now, for those of you who don't know what that means, a roller coaster is on rails. In other words, you have no control over anything, sorta. You just kind of go. Make sense? It's actually pretty common for certain other types of video games. Pretty rare for an RPG to have this. It's effectively the RPG equivalent of an auto-scroller from like a Mario game or whatever. And so this is the first of those auto-scrollers, those roller coaster levels. For lack of a better way to explain it, I think what they were going with, this is just pure speculation here, I feel like what they were going with was they were trying to have as much variety in FF6 as possible. There we go. Hey, Shiryu. They were going for as much variety as they could to try and make it not get boring, to ensure that FF6 didn't actually get boring or disinteresting or otherwise wore on the characters. So instead of just, excuse me, on the players, so instead of just, just being an RPG the whole way through, it's an RPG, with all these little strange little sections interspersed throughout it. Just a theory. I really don't have anything to back that up. Yeah, so I'm debating where to start with Ultros. Let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Yes, he has a thing for women. It's very clear. Even in the English version, it's pretty clear, but slightly interpretive. In the original Japanese text and the GBA translation, it is adamantly obvious and clear that he wants to do things with Terra. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. Get it out of our system. Get all your juvenile things out. We'll get the juvenile giggles out. I'll giggle too. Haha, it's funny. There we go. We're good. We're good. Okay. All right. Now, now that we're done with that, let's talk about Ultros overall. Ultros is the perfect example of a left-leaning. Well, left is an arbitrary direction. A comic-leaning, recurring bad guy squad type of thing. To give you another example of what I'm talking about, and we will be talking about this soon. Can't wait to get to the Chrono Trigger thing. The Mystic Trio over in Chrono Trigger. Recurring villains. It's the most common, I think, modern application of this is probably the Team Rocket, Jesse and James. In other words, two guys that aren't actually a threat, not really. They're not actually evil either. That's always a trick. You can't make your recurring villain squad evil. It doesn't work. They're there for comic relief. They're there to lighten the scene and to make the player go, aha, you know, and enjoy their presence. That's the point of that type of a thing. Yes, Shiryu. It is purely arbitrary. Oh yeah, and Meowth. I forgot Meowth. We all forgot Meowth, let's be honest with ourselves. There we go. I'm trying to think of other good examples of this type of thing, and I'm kind of failing at it, but the idea is there's two... I mentioned left-leaning. Okay, let's talk about what I mean by that. The recurring bad guy squad tends to be one of two categories, and again, whether it leans towards one or leans towards the other tends to vary. I'm just going to let this hit while I talk about this for a second. On the left hand is the comical, and on the right hand is the serious. I can give you straight examples of both right now. On the left hand, Ultros and Chupon. They are both complete jokes. There's only 2 fights in the entire game with either that are worth any kind of significance, unless you're speedrunning, in which case there's 3. And they're there for comedic factor. They're there to be like, ha ha, you know. Right side, the bodyguards of the Emperor Vandal in Secret of Mana. Geshtar, Sheiks, and Fanra. And I guess technically Thanatos. Well, I got one more game to do after this one, Preacher. Something called Halo 7. Anyways, so Gilgamesh... Well, we're getting to that a little bit, because that's the thing. But anyways, so the 4 bodyguards in Secret of Mana, there's not a trace of humor in them. They are deadly serious, vicious, evil, brutal, recurring villains. So that's the right-leaning, okay? You with me? Please don't read into any stupid politics things. I'm just picking right and left arbitrarily, okay? Okay. You know, we've got the evil leaning and we've got the humor leaning. And I've noticed that recurring villains tend to sit... You can't see what I'm doing because the webcam's not working. They tend to sit somewhere in between this scale. Now, for example, Gilgamesh tends to lean a little bit more towards the comedic, but he's not all the way on the comedic. There is a serious side to him. There is some severity to him and some danger to him. So he's like not fully leaning towards the comedic side. And you know, the Mystic Trio is another example of one that likes to swing. When we first meet the Mystic Trio, we first hear about them. I mean, what's the first thing we learn about Slash in Chrono Trigger? He's killed people and resurrected their bones to serve him in eternal torment. That's the first thing we find out about Slash. What's the next thing we see about Slash? Him laughing and joking about how it actually hurts that you beat him up so badly. So the Mystic Trio actually starts on the serious side and then completely swings over to the other side. And the Turks are another good example of one that kind of go back and forth in the middle, especially depending on which work it is. Like, for example, in Crisis Core, Or no. In Before Crisis, the Turks were pretty far onto the serious side of things, even though you were actually playing as a you get the idea. In Crisis Core, they kind of were cameos, basically. And then in FF7, they kind of went back and forth a bit. By Advent Children, they were much further onto the humorous side of things, and yet still there was still the serious aspect to them. You know, Reno and Rude were still actually able of keeping up and causing problems for the augments. So, you know, I mentioned this though. This is all relating to Ultros. It is debatable which in the FF series was the first recurring bad guy squad, bad guy character across the length of Final Fantasy. It is, in my opinion, that Gilgamesh is the first one in 5, and Ultros and Chupon are the second. You can feel free to disagree with me on this. I know it's debatable. I know we had the Elemental Lords in 4 who were semi-recurring. I know we had a bad neck. Oh my goodness. I know we had something else I was going to mention. Who was that other character? Whatever, it doesn't matter. But Ultros, though, the thing about Ultros is he is full tilt on the left. I mean, there is nothing serious about Ultros at all. I mean, literally just nothing. He's this big, the very first time we see him, what's the first thing we hear out of his gobby mouth? The first thing he says is, "Wee, game over. Don't tease the octopus, kids." That is not a serious character. I'm not complaining, by the way. It's just that's exactly what they're going for. So let me ask you this. Does Ultros work for you? Does he work as a recurring comic character who we fight, let's see, 4 times. We fight Ultros 4 times throughout the game, and Chupon once mandatory, twice if you count the ability to fight him a second time, which is optional. Now for me, Ultros works. He makes me laugh. My friend Vincent, I've referenced him several times because he and I were good friends when FF6 came out. Well, let's find out, little Billy. Well, yeah, I was going to make that point myself. So, but anyways, Vincent used to be able to do a perfect voice for Ultros. I've tried to mimic it for years and never actually succeeded. Every time, even to this day, when I try to do it, I try to mimic the voice Vincent did. And that's all, friends. And this is the victory music for defeating Ultros. I mean, this just makes my point. I mean, really, this is just... Anyways, but yeah, what Samurai said, I'm going to go ahead and put this in a Story Plus. For me, Ultros is an excellent direct example of what I was talking about earlier. A lot of the older FFs, almost all of them really, had silliness. Random, silly, just fun, humor, breaking it up. You know, FF7 and FF6 and FF5, these 3 are, in my opinion, the epitomes of that particular mentality. They just had moments that were just like, huh? And Ultros is a great break in what is otherwise an extremely serious, dark, depressing story. FF6, I have argued, is either among or the darkest of all the Final Fantasy games. This is a damned dark game. And so it's nice to have that kind of a pause to breathe every now and again, at least from my opinion. To have Ultros and just be like, hey, I'm back. I've got more lives than I've got arms. You know. Now, to respond to Shiryu's question, we have 0 backstory for Ultros, except for what is implied, obviously, the fact that he is clearly Octopus royalty. Exactly, Formotion. With the hip thrusts. Gotta have the hip thrusts. It would be like having FF9 without the jiggle physics. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Another interesting... I just want to point this out. You see that word right there, thrashed? There are, like... God, at least a dozen times in FF6 where Woolsey took a word, you know, defeated, killed, ruined, destroyed, however it works, and translated it into thrashed. And smashed, that's the one. Thrashed and smashed. We smash Kefka. We will thrash Kefka. We will smash this enemy. You know, just he does that a lot. I've often wondered if that was just his style, because Wolseley definitely had a style to his translations. Anyways, hey Tegrin, and hey the Geek. What is up, both of you? Just feel like pointing out that Edgar's the one that figured out that Ultros is still there. Yes, it is confirmed in proper translations. This is Ultros grabbing Terra's leg. Make of it what you will. Also note that Sabin, the chaste one of the two brothers, is the one who gets really pissed off about this to go after Ultros. Now, we got to talk about something serious for a second. I mean, we just had the break of Ultros. He's a plus to the story, definitely. This is a review, and that means I need to be fair in my judgment around it. I mean, I know you look in the lower left of my screen, and the gameplays and the story pluses are just huge. Even though there have been negatives, they've been just completely overwhelmed by positives. However, is this bad writing? Now, I've often said that the challenge of writing, what writing is getting from point A to point B and making it work. You know where you need to end in writing. You know where you're going for. You don't know how to, and most often, at least for me and several other people I've talked to, the challenge is how to get there. What do you do to make your way towards that point? That's the catch. That's the trick. That's the difficulty. What they need here is for Sabin to get separated from the party so he can go do his own adventure. And I mean, really, Locke's scenario is fun, but short. Edgar's scenario is incredibly short. It's practically just a commercial break. Sabin's scenario of these three is huge. Is easily 3 or 4 times the size of the other two, and that's ignoring doing optional stuff. And involves tons of lore, tons of story, the introduction of 3 new characters under the right circumstance. You know, all sorts of stuff over there. So they need Sabin to go off to do his adventure, right? So how do they get Sabin off? How do they make it over? Well, the way they have it is Sabin is so pissed off that Ultros decided to manhandle Terra that he's going to go leap into the raging waters and blitz him. So the question comes, is this bad writing, good writing, or neutral? Now, I've been thinking about this ever since I started this sentence. I'm leaning towards neutral. I don't think this is an example of bad writing. From what we've seen of Sabin, and admittedly it is not much so far, but from what we've seen of Sabin so far, it is entirely keeping in character that he would want to be that kind of, you know, for lack of a better term, knight in shining armor kind of an individual. The kind of guy who wants to be chivalrous. There we go. That's a better word. And because of how, again, the chaste brother of the two. You know, Edgar's the lech, Sabin's the chaste one. The one who is the monk, for God's sakes, is probably genuinely pissed off at what Ultros has been doing here. And he is also probably very confident in his skills and abilities. Now, he jumps in there into the raging rapids. Now, the thing is, if you think about it, that's not really an issue, is it? I mean, it's raging rapids, whoop-de-crap, right? Well, then this happens. Right there. You know how he's like, what the? I know I keep referencing this guy. Vincent, my friend, had this longest standing theory that the reason he was like, what the? Is what he saw under there was actually Chupon. And the reason he got blown into the air and off thing and didn't get himself back into the raft was Chupon sneezed him. Now, I've thought and rethought about this scene several times since Vincent first postulated that theory. And every time I think about it, I was like, you know, that just makes the most sense. We know Ultros and Chupon were around since, you know, or coordinating together since before we actually see them together. And it wouldn't really surprise me if Chupon's just kind of hanging out down there and it was like, ah. And it would also explain how Sabin is unable to recover, even though he technically probably should be able to. So I think I'm going to go with neutral. I'm not going to give it a positive to the story, but I do think this is not an example. Too many negatives. I think this is not an example of bad writing. That is my take on it. And no, we have not suplexed the train yet. And then Sabin gets carried off by the rapids. This thing, how many times has an FF game done this? You could argue FF9 did it with ATEs. By the way, I liked the ATE system. We need to have more ATE in our FFs. I liked that system. This is awesome. More FFs need to do this, in my honest opinion. Because these three stories, basically, this is the holy grail for a lot of writers in terms of books, in terms of movies, in terms of television, in terms of games. Having multiple stories happen at the same time is one of those things. It's difficult to pull off. I shouldn't say it's the holy grail. It's just one of those things most writers tend to like because it's difficult to pull off. But if you do, if you successfully pull it off, it's awesome. And especially if all the stories thread into each other and have to do with one another. In a game setting like this, what we're doing here is one of those ways to do it. You literally go and play one character's arc, and then the next, and then the next. And then you kind of figure out, they give you hints and clues. We'll be talking about this as we go. They give you hints as to what is happening when, because all three of these are happening relatively at the same time. But obviously several of these are not happening like concurrently. Like the beginning of Locke's scenario is not the same as the beginning of Edgar's scenario, is not the same as the beginning of Sabin's scenario. In fact, I've actually, once upon a time, I got a piece of paper and tried to figure out my relative estimate based on the hints in the game of where the timelines were. Edgar's scenario basically finishes really, really early. So early, in fact, it actually finishes before Locke's or Sabin's, before Locke's scenario even begins. And then Sabin's scenario begins, during Edgar's scenario, but towards the end of it, and so forth and so on. But either way. And yeah, Birth by Sleep is another good example of doing the multiple storylines at once thing. Yeah, KOTOR 2 tried to pull off the same kind of trick. And it is a hard thing to do. It is a hard thing. You've got a couple of options, including, like, for example, you can do what they do here, just play through one storyline and then play through the next. Some games have done a thing where you can switch back and forth on the fly, or rather, at set points, you'll switch perspectives to the other one, etc., etc. But anyways, so with that in mind, like I said, this scenario is clearly and definitively first. Edgar, Bannon, and Terra are obviously and clearly just at most minutes away from the end of the split of when we fought Ultros. So this happens literally right after that fight we just did, and therefore is clearly and definitively first. Sabin's scenario, he ends up way over there. And I mean way over there. So his scenario, in my perspective, and don't forget, he's not on a raft, so he's not moving at full speed. Like these guys are. He's being thrown by the rivers and trying to survive the trip and all the rocks and all the other crap that's in his way as he gets blown by the rapids halfway across the continent. Well, that's an exaggeration, but quite a ways over there. So he's next, basically, in my opinion, but he won't even get to the beginning of his scenario until we've already decently advanced a ways through this one. Now, one of the big hints is the interactions of Celes, Kefka, General Leo, and the Empire in general. There's two ways to interpret a hint, okay? In Sabin's scenario, General Leo gets called away by a letter from Emperor Gestalt, and he is summoned away to deal with a problem which has confused and perplexed him, and that's all we know. What we also know happened at relatively the same time is that Celes turned traitor. The reason Celes turned traitor is because she found out about Kefka's plan to poison Doma. So you can see how all of these little events do tie into each other once you think about them logically, right? You with me on this? Feel free to tell me you're not with me on this. You don't have to agree with me. Now, my point is, there's a few different ways to line up these events. My personal favorite is the fact that, there we go, Sabin's scenario happens, Leo gets the letter about Celes turning traitor, and therefore, and this happens a few days after she has turned traitor, and she has now been imprisoned in South Figaro, the city she was going to conquer, while she was, now Celes was a general, So she has access to things like, supply reports, requisitions, that kind of things. And so she finds out, as the general of this force that has landed at South Figaro, that another series of supplies is heading to the Doma front. Now, we know the Doma Empire War has been happening for some time. It's even by the time we get there, it's been an ongoing battle for well, we don't have an exact date, but I've always estimated months at least. Or, excuse me, month at least, weeks at least, possibly into the months range. That's just my interpretation. But, so that battle's been raging, so Kefka has requisitioned this poison. Celes finds out about that, realizes what he's going to do, and that's the last straw. That's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Celes can't deal with it anymore, and she decides to go traitor, because she's, to put it as nicely as I can, incredibly naive. She decides to just kind of openly go traitor, and so she's locked up and chained up, and they're going to kill her. And they don't really know what to do with her because there's no other high-ranking official left in South Figaro, so they send a message mission off to the next nearest official, which happens to be over at the Doma situation, where Kefka and General Leo are. General Leo gets the letter and says, okay, I have to go back and deal with this, right? So General Leo leaves. We all know what happens in Doma in Leo's absence. Leo heads back to South Figaro to figure out what the hell happens. That, in my opinion, is when Locke's scenario actually begins, well into Sabin's scenario. Having spent, because remember, the Locke scenario begins with he has spent some time stymieing the Imperial efforts, but now he needs to get out. So we know time has passed, period. That's undeniable. But what we do not know is that Shadow is on the stream right now. Hey, Shadow. But what we do not know is how much time. But if you're taking my timeline here, we're talking a period of time, probably at least a day or two or three, maybe even longer than that, depending on how travel time works. It's always just a guesswork at that point in a game like this. How long it actually takes to travel across half a continent on foot, who knows? But so that's when General Leo leaves. That's when Locke's scenario begins, and he manages to rescue Celes. And I love this because it adds another niggle, another layer to the situation, because it means Locke didn't just save Celes, it means he saved her in the nick of time, and none of them were aware of it because General Leo was coming back. General Leo was coming back to deal with her, and even though Leo is not exactly a bastard, he is still someone who is loyal to the Empire, especially at this point in time, and would most likely turn over to the Emperor, who would probably frickin' kill her, or worse, turn her over to Sid for experimentation, or God knows what. So Locke actually saved Celes just in the nick of time by my interpretation of these events. Now, like I said, there's a few other ways you can perceive this. There's a few other ways that these events can line up. One of the other ones I like, I've heard before, speculated by someone who is not me, was the idea that Leo, the letter Leo gets in Sabin's scenario, is actually a letter saying General Celes has escaped. And therefore, now he has to deal with the situation. Hence, that would put Locke's scenario significantly before the timeline I just postulated. But while I like that, I don't like that nearly as much as the one I postulated. What do you guys think? Honestly, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts, as I ever would. In the meantime, let's talk about how the Narsh Guard are portrayed as simultaneously stereotypically pig-headedness, and at the same time are completely understandable in their caution, because, again, 3 Magitek armors just busted through here and killed the crap out of a lot of their people, including her, who is now walking openly back in, along with Bannon, who nobody knows who the hell this guy is. Remember, these people are not allies of the Returners, so they wouldn't recognize Bannon. And then there's Edgar. Now, they should recognize Edgar, but they're not thinking in their right mind right now, are they? So rather than bothering to think, they just shove them out. You might be like, well, this is stupid. We can destroy every guard in here in due time. That would be easy. Yeah, exactly, Shiryu. Exactly. Isn't that tragic? Either way, we could just burst through this town, kill every single guard in here, force our way in and say, hey, we're here to help. You could probably understand why we don't do that. I've actually had a player, I forget who, but ask me that once upon a time. Why don't we just break in? Because we're not here to hurt Narsh. We're here to help Narsh. We're here to recruit Narsh, even. So, you know. That's why we